So I wrote about this quite a few years ago when I discovered it. Gamow, G-A-M-O-W, and Eddington. It did a lot of damage to astrophysics. I'll read this whole thing out to you. It's about 3 paragraphs worth, but it's from this book, The Scientists, History of Science Told Through the Lives of Its Greatest Inventors. It's pretty thick, but I skipped over a lot of stuff to get to the good stuff. And I'll go ahead and explain what's going on here. Long story short, towards the beginning, they needed the sun to be as old as the earth. So they were looking for a way to power the sun to make it as old as the earth, being that they assumed that the earth has always been in orbit around the sun, and our solar system has been in its configuration for its entire existence. There was no other configuration, according to the dogmatists. But anyways, here we go. Big problem. The process by which protons penetrate heavy nuclei is the opposite of the process of alpha decay, in which an alpha particle or helium nucleus escapes from a heavy nucleus, and it is governed by the same rules of quantum tunneling discovered by Gamow. Gamow's calculations of the tunnel effect were published in 1928, and just a year later, the Welsh astrophysicist Robert Atkinson and his German colleague Fritz Heuermanns, who had previously worked with Gamow, published a paper describing the kind of nuclear reactions that might occur inside stars as protons fused with heavy nuclei. Keep that in mind. Quantum tunneling was discovered with a math equation. No way, dude. You don't discover physical processes by doing calculations. You have to have an actual experiment involved. There wasn't a single experiment that showed that quantum tunneling was real or even possible. They just invented it out of thin air. Their paper began with the words, "Recently, Gamow demonstrated that positively charged particles can penetrate the atomic nucleus even if traditional belief holds their energy to be inadequate." Throw the traditional beliefs out the window. We don't need experiments showing this is real. We can just proclaim it and therefore it's true. And it says, continues, "This is the key point. Eddington, in particular, had used the laws of physics to calculate the temperature at the heart of the sun from its mass radius and the rate at which it is releasing energy into space. Without the tunnel effect, this temperature, about 15 million Kelvin, is too low to allow for nuclei to come together with sufficient force that they overcome their mutual electrical repulsion and stick together." Notice, 15 million Kelvin is too cold for the process of nuclear fusion to take place in. They knew that the sun wasn't a fusion reactor way back in the 1920s. In the early 1920s, when physicists first calculated the conditions of temperature and pressure required for protons to fuse together to make helium, this seemed to many an insuperable problem. In his book, The Internal Constitution of the Stars, published in 1926, just as the quantum revolution was taking place, Eddington replied that we do not argue with the critic who urges that the stars are not hot enough for this process. We tell him to go and find a hotter place. This is usually interpreted as Eddington telling his critics to go to hell. It was the quantum revolution and tunneling in particular which soon showed that Eddington was right to stick to his guns, and nothing indicates more clearly the interdependence of different scientific disciplines. Progress in understanding the internal workings of the stars could only be made once the quantum properties of entities such as protons were beginning to be understood. That's just fluff. Quantum tunneling is pseudoscience. There was never an experiment to show that it was possible. There still isn't an experiment to show that it's important or it's even relevant to astrophysics. And what's sad is that Eddington was telling people to, quote, go to hell because there was no hotter place than 15 million Kelvin inside of a star. Well, there is a hotter place, Eddington. It's called AGNs, or active galactic nuclei. Those are the places where material is ejected from the centers of young birthing galaxies, where the temperature is far hotter than 15 million Kelvin. Those are the places where the fusion reactions take place. That's where matter is created in active galaxies. That's what a galaxy does when it's born. It creates matter. But Eddington didn't know that. Radio astronomy essentially didn't even exist for the most part. So there was no way to image these young birthing galaxies, which have two bipolar outflows. I mentioned that in another talk, Hercules A, I think it's the galaxy 2C273, I believe. But all the young birthing galaxies can be seen very clearly in the radio frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum. But of course, Eddington didn't know that. He was just running around telling people to, quote, go to a hotter place. And that's basically it. Stars are not fusion reactors. And that's why I wanted to read this out to you guys. That's why the whole fusion grifting is taking place. Oh, we're going to build another fusion reactor. We're going to power the Earth with fusion power and yada yada, so on and so forth. They're all going to fail because that's not how it works. Those experiments cannot get anywhere near the required temperatures required for fusion to take place. So basically, they're just grifting, getting a lot of money, and if you say anything bad about their experimental fusion reactors, they call you a pseudoscientist or a crank or stupid or what have you. But the problems that we're facing here stretch almost to about 100 years ago, when Eddington and Gamow just took astrophysics and threw it off a cliff. And that's one of the big reasons why I can't take a lot of these people seriously anymore. It's because they don't study history and they don't look at the social constructs and the egos of these people when they were, spreading their disinformation around. But anyways, that sums it up. And for those new listeners, stellar evolution is planet formation. Hi, Celeste.